There is a strange paradox woven into the fabric of human perception, one that bends the way society evaluates its outliers. When a person steps beyond the circle of accepted behavior, when they dare to tilt their head at an angle the crowd does not expect, they acquire a label. That label is rarely gentle, it is whispered behind their back, printed into the silence of disapproving eyes, muttered with condescension by those who stay safely within the boundaries. The label is eccentric. Yet, if time, chance, and persistence reshape the same person's path into one that produces wealth, recognition, or triumph, the word changes like a coin flipped in sunlight. What was once eccentric suddenly becomes different, and different in this context carries not contempt, but reverence. This shift of language reveals something profound about how humans interpret the unusual. Difference, in its raw state, unsettles, it threatens the familiar, disturbs the calm waters of convention, and rattles the fragile structures of shared comfort. To call someone eccentric is to attempt to shrink them, to domesticate their strangeness into a box of mockery. But success transforms the same quality into proof of vision, genius, and originality. The very gestures once laughed at are rebranded as quirks of brilliance. The same silence that once mocked now listens intently for wisdom. That is, not that the individual has changed in essence. The way they perceive the world, the way they think or act outside of ordinary lines, remains the same. What has changed is the lens through which the collective perceives them. This duality is not unlike the way light behaves in the universe. It can appear as both wave and particle depending on how it is observed. Difference is like light. It is neither blessing nor curse on its own, but the observer decides its meaning. To explore this phenomenon is to peer into the deeper mechanisms of how societies construct value, legitimacy, and identity. It is to recognize that success is not merely an achievement but an alchemical solvent that transmutes ridicule into admiration. When someone stands at the margins, their voice echoes in empty holes, but when they succeed, the holes themselves bend toward them, amplifying the same notes that were once ignored. The eccentric becomes the sage, the deviant becomes the pioneer, the misfit becomes the visionary. Why does this transformation occur? The answer lies partly in our ancient hunger for narratives. Humans are storytellers, and within our stories, we seek archetypes to guide and inspire. The successful different person becomes a character we can admire without risk. Their deviation is retroactively justified by outcome. In contrast, the unsuccessful eccentric reminds us of the dangers of divergence. They embody the possibility of wasted time, wasted energy, and the abyss of failure. So we comfort ourselves by labeling them eccentrics, as if to distance ourselves from their fate. It is not their difference that frightens us, it is the reminder that difference without success exposes us to ridicule, loneliness, and oblivion. This then is not merely a sociological curiosity, it is a mirror that reflects the tension between individuality and conformity, between the daring spirit of creation and the defensive instincts of the tribe. To be different is to walk on the razor's edge of becoming either a remembered visionary or a forgotten fool. Success is the invisible line that decides on which side of history one will stand. But if we widen our gaze beyond the social theater, this paradox echoes cosmic patterns. Stars themselves are eccentrics in the void, explosions of fire and gravity that defy the calm darkness around them. A single star burning alone in the infinite black might seem like a strange anomaly, an eccentric wandering light. But when enough stars form patterns, when constellations emerge, humanity projects meaning onto them, weaving myths and legends. The star has not changed, but its context transforms it into a guide, a sign, a story. Likewise, the individual does not change when society rebrands them. The same flame that once appeared chaotic now illuminates pathways for others, simply because its light reached farther than expected. Perhaps then, to be called eccentric in the beginning is inevitable. It is the seed phase, when the soil of perception cannot yet see the tree within. The challenge lies not in avoiding this label, but in enduring it long enough for the cycle of recognition to shift. Success is not merely personal, it is communal. Acceptance of one's difference is valuable, and until that threshold is crossed, the individual remains at the mercy of the tribe's instinct to mock what it does not understand. Yet, if we pause here and reflect, we must recognize that success itself is a fragile concept. It is often measured in the currency of the world, wealth, fame, or recognition. but its deeper essence may lie elsewhere. There are those who are never successful in the worldly sense, yet their eccentricities ripple forward in time, planting seeds that bloom long after they are gone. Van Gogh painted with colors that seemed mad to his contemporaries. Only later did the world decide to rename his strangeness as genius. Nikola Tesla died in poverty, mocked for his wild experiments, yet the modern world hums with the electricity of his visions. Success, therefore, may not always belong to the moment, it sometimes belongs to eternity. Thus, the phrase, "You are only called different when you are successful, otherwise, you are eccentric," is not a simple commentary on reputation. It is a keyhole into the strange architecture of human perception, value, and time. It forces us to ask whether we live for the gaze of others or for the truth of our own path. It reminds us that what is dismissed today may be revered tomorrow, and that strangeness is the crucible from which innovation emerges. As we step into this exploration, we will move deeper into the layers of meaning this paradox holds. We will examine the core themes that sustain it, the symbolic stories that illustrate its truth, the practical implications it has for anyone daring to be different, and finally, the transformative call it whispers to those standing at the edges of acceptance. For now, let us linger with this first unveiling. Difference is the same flame, whether called eccentricity or genius. What changes is not the fire, but the world's willingness to gather around it. At the heart of the paradox, "You are only called different when you are successful, otherwise, you are eccentric," lies a profound truth about how human beings evaluate each other, how they assign meaning to behaviors, and how they interpret the unusual. To call someone different is to elevate them, to place their divergence on a pedestal of legitimacy. To call someone eccentric is to diminish them, to make their divergence appear trivial, laughable, or even pitiable. Yet the behaviors, the thoughts, the ways of living that earned either title may be identical. What shifts is not the person themselves, but the framework within which others situate them. That framework is built upon success or the lack thereof. The first theme that rises from this truth is the tyranny of outcomes. In most human societies, actions are not judged on their intrinsic quality, but on the results they produce. The same reckless gamble that ruins one man may make another wealthy beyond measure. To the ruined man, people shake their heads and say he was eccentric, foolish, and misguided. To the enriched man, the world admires his daring spirit, his ability to see what others could not. The action itself was the same, only its outcome crowned one and condemned the other. In this sense, society does not worship difference itself, but rather difference that pays dividends. This is not merely a commentary on external validation. It reflects something much deeper about how humans are wired. We are pattern-seeking creatures, always searching for cause and effect, always eager to make sense of randomness. When we see someone's unconventional ways lead to success, we reinterpret their quirks as indicators of hidden wisdom. We retrofit a story that makes sense. Of course they were different. They had to be in order to achieve what no one else could. But when unconventionality leads to obscurity, we frame the story differently. Of course they were eccentric. That's why they never amounted to anything. In both cases, we rewrite the narrative backward, forcing it to conform to the outcome. The second theme is the fragile boundary between individuality and conformity. To belong to society is to submit to certain unwritten rules of behavior and thought. Too much deviation, and the tribe perceives a threat. Too much conformity, and the individual suffocates in sameness. The label eccentric is society's mechanism for punishing those who deviate without producing proof of value. It is a warning signal: stray too far without demonstrating worth, and you risk exile into ridicule. The label different, by contrast, is a reward that allows deviation to be celebrated, but only when it returns something tangible to the collective innovation, wealth, art, or inspiration. In this way, society enforces conformity through language itself, turning words into invisible fences that herd human behavior. The third theme extends beyond sociology and into the metaphysical, the illusion of time. What is eccentric in one era may be visionary in another. History is filled with figures whose differences were ridiculed during their lifetimes, but enshrined in reverence centuries later. It is not only success in the immediate sense that redeems difference, but also success across time. A mind too far ahead of its age will almost always be labeled eccentric. Yet, when the world finally catches up, the same mind is renamed as genius. The transformation is not in the person but in the collective consciousness. Here, time itself becomes the arbiter of whether difference is cursed or blessed. This leads to a fourth theme, the deep human fear of irrelevance. To be eccentric in the eyes of others is to be irrelevant, to be dismissed. That fear cuts into the core of the human psyche, for we are creatures of connection, and irrelevance feels like social death. To be called different, on the other hand, is to gain a sense of immortality. Our uniqueness is not a liability but a gift to the world. Thus, the dance between eccentric and different mirrors the eternal human longing to matter, to be remembered, to have one's divergence justify its existence. But beneath these social and psychological layers, there is a fifth, almost cosmic theme, the architecture of dual perception. The world operates in dualities: light and dark, order and chaos, success and failure. Human beings filter reality through these dual structures, rarely perceiving the continuum beneath them. In truth, eccentricity and difference are not separate categories but two faces of the same essence. They exist as potentials within the same reality, activated only by the prism of outcome. Much like the way the moon is both bright and dark, depending on where one stands, a person is eccentric from one perspective and different from another. The individual remains unchanged. It is the vantage point that shifts, and so we see that the phrase, "you are only called different when you are successful, otherwise you are eccentric," is not just about labels. It is a living demonstration of the fragile, subjective nature of human judgment. It is about the way we assign value retroactively, the way we use language to enforce conformity, the way time reshapes perception, the way fear of irrelevance haunts our souls, and the way dualities distort our vision of truth. What, then, is the implication for those who dare to live differently? It is that one must understand the arena in which these judgments occur. The world may never recognize the intrinsic worth of difference until it is proven by some external measure, yet, at the same time, intrinsic worth exists regardless of recognition. To know this is to live with a double awareness, one eye on the timeless truth that difference is sacred in itself, and one eye on the temporal reality that society rarely acknowledges it until outcomes align. In this awareness lies a strange kind of freedom, for if one knows that labels are fickle, one is less bound by them. To be called eccentric is not necessarily failure, and to be called different is not necessarily validation. They are reflections in a shifting mirror, dependent on the gaze of others, not the essence of the self. And in that understanding, a deeper strength emerges, the strength to continue walking the path of difference, regardless of whether it is mocked or praised. Knowing that both words are only masks society places upon the same eternal face. To step further into the paradox of difference and eccentricity, it is not enough to analyze themes with intellectual clarity. Ideas live most fully when they take shape in symbols, allegories, and stories, when they move beyond the sterile corridors of thought and enter the landscapes of imagination. For truth is often hidden in fables, encoded in the timeless dance of archetypes. And so let us wander into symbolic narratives, for they reveal the inner skeleton of this paradox more vividly than argument ever could. Consider the story of the firekeeper. In a village nestled against a vast forest, one man tended a small flame outside his hut every night. He spoke to the fire, fed it herbs, and swore that it answered him. The villagers mocked him, calling him eccentric, whispering that he was mad to waste time on smoke and embers. Yet one winter, when a great frost came and the village's hearths could not withstand the cold, his fire alone endured. The villagers came to him, shivering and desperate, and gathered around his flame. Suddenly, he was no longer eccentric, he was different. His devotion, once ridiculed, became their salvation. The fire had not changed, nor had his ritual, but the context transformed the meaning. In this parable, the fire is difference itself, and success is the moment others discover their need for what once seemed irrelevant. Or consider another allegory, that of the solitary star. In the beginning, when the sky was only darkness, one star burst into light. Alone, it appeared strange, wandering, even unnecessary against the infinite void. The other stars had not yet been born, and so this one shone in solitude, dismissed by the silence of space. Ages later, constellations emerged, and travelers began mapping their journeys by the lights in the sky. That first star, once a lonely eccentric, became a guidepost, a fixed anchor in the myths of humanity. Here, we see that time itself transforms eccentricity into difference, reminding us that recognition is not always immediate, but sometimes waits for the universe to catch up. These stories echo again in history. Think of Galileo, who dared to say the Earth moved around the sun. In his day, he was condemned, branded as a dangerous eccentric who threatened the sacred order. Yet centuries later, his eccentricity is enshrined as scientific genius, and children learn his name as one of the fathers of modern astronomy. What was eccentric then is different now, not because Galileo's truth shifted, but because human perception finally aligned with it. Or think of Emily Dickinson, who wrote in solitude, her poems hidden away in a drawer. To her neighbors, she was peculiar, a recluse whose life seemed small and odd. Only after her death did the world discover her words, and suddenly, her eccentric solitude became a mark of poetic vision. She had always been the same person. It was recognition that rebranded her difference. These narratives reveal the symbolic architecture beneath the phrase. To be eccentric is to be a seed beneath the soil, unseen, perhaps ridiculed as useless, even invisible. To be different is to be the flower that blooms, the same essence finally visible, admired for its uniqueness. The seed and the flower are not opposites, they are stages. And yet, the cruel trick of perception is that society often praises only the flower, while forgetting that it once mocked the seed. Let us explore this further with a more mythical lens. Imagine two masks hanging in the theater of life. One mask is labeled eccentric, painted with garish colors, exaggerated features, and a mocking smile. The other is labeled different, adorned with gold and reverence, a mask of wisdom and nobility. When an individual steps onto the stage with their quirks, their visions, their strangeness, the audience chooses which mask to press upon them. The performer has no control over which mask is chosen. If they fail, the audience jeers and calls them eccentric. If they succeed, the audience applauds and crowns them as different. Yet beneath both masks, the performer's face remains the same. The masks are illusions, props used by society to project its judgment, but they do not touch the essence of the actor. This symbolic duality reminds us of another truth. Eccentricity and difference are not qualities inherent to the individual, but reflections cast by the collective gaze. It is like the moon, forever half in shadow, half in light. To one observer, it glows with mystery and beauty. To another, it is merely a rock suspended in darkness. The moon itself does not change. Neither does the eccentric person when they are renamed as different. What shifts is the eye of the beholder. And yet, these symbolic narratives hold a hidden encouragement. They whisper that ridicule may simply be the first stage of reverence, that obscurity may be the soil from which legacy grows. They remind us that eccentricity is not failure, but potential unrecognized. To be called eccentric may even be a necessary initiation, a rite of passage that tests the resolve of those who dare to step outside the ordinary. For only those who can endure the laughter of the crowd without extinguishing their flame have any hope of becoming the firekeepers who later save the village. So when we dwell in these symbolic stories, the firekeeper, the solitary star, the hidden poet, the masks of the theater, we are reminded that human judgment is fragile, shifting, and often blind to the deeper truth. Difference and eccentricity are but two words for the same essence, seen from two moments in time. And in this understanding, we find both caution and courage. Caution, in that we recognize how fickle external validation is. Courage, in that we see how often the eccentric today is the visionary tomorrow. It is one thing to trace the symbolic dance between eccentricity and difference. Another to ask, how does this knowledge shape the way we live? For the paradox, if left only in the realm of myth and metaphor, becomes a beautiful but distant star. Its light inspires, but it does not warm. To bring it closer, we must explore what it means in the intimate theater of daily existence, in the choices we make, in the risks we take, and in the way we interpret our own strangeness in the mirror of society. The first and most immediate implication is resilience. To live differently is to invite misunderstanding, perhaps even ridicule. This is inevitable, for society clings to its patterns as a ship clings to its anchor, fearing the drift of the unknown. To endure being called eccentric, therefore, is a necessary condition for anyone who aspires to be called different later. This endurance is not passive resignation but active faith, faith that the path one walks has value beyond the approval of the moment. It requires a kind of spiritual armor, the ability to walk through laughter, doubt, or isolation without surrendering the flame that guides one's steps. Another implication is the redefinition of success itself. If society only validates difference, once it bears fruit, then the seeker must decide what kind of fruit they wish to grow. For some, it may be wealth, invention, or artistic acclaimed forms of success easily recognized by others. For others, the fruit may be less tangible: inner peace, authenticity, the quiet satisfaction of having lived truthfully. The world may never rename such a person as different. They may die with the label of eccentricity still clinging to them. Yet, if their inner life was fulfilled, if their spirit flowered in authenticity, then perhaps the label ceases to matter. In this way, the paradox urges us to ask, do we live for recognition, or do we live for truth? This question deepens when we consider time. Practical life is often short-sighted. We seek immediate validation, immediate proof that our efforts matter. But the symbolic stories remind us that recognition is often delayed. What seems eccentric today may be revered tomorrow, or 50 years after one's death. This awareness teaches patience, and patience is a radical act in a world addicted to speed. It allows us to plant seeds without needing to witness the harvest, to create without demanding applause, to trust that time has its own rhythm of acknowledgement. There is also a social implication: the way we ourselves treat the eccentrics around us. If we recognize the fragility of the line between eccentricity and difference, perhaps we will be slower to mock, quicker to listen, gentler in our judgment. The neighbor who hoards books on forgotten sciences, the artist whose canvases seem too strange, the thinker who questions assumptions we take for granted, each may be ridiculed now, but remembered later. To meet them with curiosity rather than contempt is to practice a deeper form of wisdom, one that acknowledges that today's eccentricity may be tomorrow's light. In the realm of creativity and innovation, the paradox carries further weight. Every new idea, by definition, begins as an eccentricity, a deviation from what is known and accepted. The entrepreneur who builds a product no one understands, the scientist who proposes a theory that unsettles the establishment, the artist who paints with colors unseen before all, are labeled eccentric until their creations prove valuable. To innovate, then, is to accept eccentricity as the birthplace of transformation. The practical implication is simple but demanding. If we wish to create anything truly original, we must embrace the risk of being misunderstood, even ridiculed, until time or success transforms perception. And yet, not all eccentricities blossom into celebrated differences. This too must be acknowledged. Some deviations do not yield fruit, some experiments do not bear results. Does this render the eccentric life meaningless? Not necessarily, for even in failure, there is a beauty in authenticity, a dignity in having lived one's truth without disguising it. In this way, eccentricity without success may still be valuable, not because society renames it, but because it remains an act of courage in the face of conformity. Practically then, the integration of this paradox into life means living with a dual awareness. On one side, the pragmatic need to shape one's difference into something tangible, visible, and useful to the world. On the other, the deeper truth that difference is sacred in itself, whether or not it ever wins recognition. To hold both sides at once is to walk with wisdom, neither dismissing society's judgments entirely nor surrendering one's essence to them. In relationships, this awareness softens our expectations. We learn to tolerate the oddities of those we love, knowing that quirks may later prove to be gifts. We learn to see past the labels, understanding that what is dismissed today may, under different circumstances, be celebrated. In raising children, it teaches us to nurture their strangeness rather than suffocate it. For what appears eccentric in a child may be the seed of a future genius. Even in leadership, the lesson is profound. Great leaders are often eccentrics until their vision succeeds. To lead is to accept this liminal space, to walk with the knowledge that the world may not understand until the fruits are undeniable. Thus, leadership requires not only strategy but also endurance in the face of ridicule. Ultimately, the practical implication of this paradox is not to chase the label of different but to live authentically through the season of eccentric. If the world catches up, it will rename us. If it does not, our difference remains true regardless. And in this truth lies freedom, the freedom to live beyond the prison of others' perceptions, to walk the path of the firekeeper, even if the village never gathers at our flame. At the end of our exploration, we return to the paradox with which we began. You are only called different when you are successful, otherwise you are eccentric. It is, on the surface, a sharp observation about society's fickleness, but beneath the surface, it is a mirror that reflects not just how others see us, but how we see ourselves, and what we decide to do with the strangeness that pulses in our veins. For what is difference, if not the refusal to dissolve into the gray fabric of conformity? And what is eccentricity if not the world's impatient attempt to dismiss that refusal until it can be proven useful? The two are not enemies, they are twin shadows cast by the same flame. The flame is our uniqueness, the spark of perception or creation that does not fit the ordinary mold. Society, blind and cautious, gives it names that change with the winds of time and the tides of success. But the flame itself, burning quietly at the center of who we are, remains unchanged, and so the call is clear. To live authentically, one must be willing to endure the seasons of eccentricity without guarantee of their transformation into difference. To live only for recognition is to surrender our flame to the cold hands of others. To live for truth, however, is to allow the flame to burn regardless of whether it illuminates a world that applauds us or a world that mocks us. The dignity of difference does not depend on its acceptance. It depends only on its fidelity to itself. History, myth, and our own private stories remind us again and again that the eccentric of today may be the pioneer of tomorrow. Yet they also remind us that even those whose eccentricities never find the crown of recognition have lived no less a life, for they dared to be unrepeatable in a universe that constantly pressures us to repeat. They dared to embody colors that did not match the palette of the moment. They dared to live in a rhythm unaligned with the ticking of the world's clocks. The transformational invitation, then, is not to strive to be called different, nor to escape being called eccentric. It is to free ourselves from the tyranny of names altogether, to recognize that eccentric and different are mirrors held by society, not truths about the soul. To walk into the theater of life without needing to know which mask the audience will place upon us. To create, to love, to think, to act in the fullness of our own flame, whether the crowd jeers or applauds. This freedom requires courage, it requires patience, for recognition is often delayed beyond our sight. It requires humility, for even brilliance may never be seen as such in one's own lifetime. But it also offers the deepest form of power, the power to live as one's true self, untouched by the shallow winds of external judgment, for in the end, all labels dissolve. The word eccentric fades with the voices that mocked it. The word different fades with the applause that once raised it high. What remains is only the flame and the life it illuminated. Perhaps this is the final lesson hidden in the paradox, that to live authentically is already a form of success. Regardless of how the world names it, to carry one's eccentricity with grace is to walk the path of hidden genius, even if no one else ever discovers it. To carry one's difference with humility is to remember that we, too, once wore the mask of eccentricity until time shifted its gaze. And so, the call to you, the reader, is this: protect your flame, tend to it as the firekeeper did, even if others laugh at the smoke. Shine as the solitary star, even if the sky is empty around you. Write your poems, paint your canvases, pursue your vision, live your truth. Whether the world calls it eccentric or different is none of your concern. For what matters is not the name the world gives you, but the fidelity with which you give yourself to the life that only you can live. In this way, you transcend the paradox altogether. You are neither eccentric nor different. You are simply, irrevocably yourself. And in that truth lies the only success that matters.